Hello, and welcome to the Quiet and Strong podcast, especially for introverts. I'm your host, David Hall, and the creator of quietandstrong.com. This is a weekly podcast dedicated to understanding the strengths and needs of introverts. Introversion is not something to fix, but to be embraced. Normally, we will air each episode on Monday morning. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform. So I recall having a conversation with a friend when I first started blogging a few years ago. He was worried about being labeled as an introvert because of the stigma he felt that was attached to it. He was very successful in his industry, but thought that his industry was not made for introverts. He asked me how we end the stigma attached to introversion. I think he wanted a simple answer, but of course, there isn't a simple answer. I did say that I'm trying to do my part to increase understanding. I had started a blog and was starting to write my first book, which of course I finished now. And at the time, there was many great blogs and websites, Facebook, Twitter. There's lots of books and YouTube videos. So lots of great work was being done. And I was very encouraged, but there was still a lot of work to do. Of course, I've come to understand myself better since that time. And I've come to realize that being an introvert isn't about a label. It's about understanding how you function and learning how to work with your individual strengths. But there are still so many people, both introverts and extroverts, that see the term as introvert as a negative label. How will we end that stigma? So as I read and write about introverts, it becomes clear that the definition for introverts seems to vary depending on who you talk to. I would like to make a fresh start and come up with a new label with helpful definitions. Maybe I will. Susan Cain, author of the book Quiet, said, "There's a word for people who are in their heads too much. Thinkers." I like that term, thinkers, as Susan Cain puts it. But everyone thinks, so I wonder if maybe we should call introverts deep thinkers instead. I know that for me, this is where much of my strength comes from. It's also been the source of many issues in the past when I lacked the understanding and self-awareness of how my deep thinking is a strength, and also didn't understand where my weaknesses were. For now, introvert's a term people seem to know, and so I will continue to use that. I may appear quiet to some, as I'm naturally deep in thought, but don't be fooled. I'm strong and stubborn, relentless, passionate, caring, determined, and much more. Again, so much great progress is being made in understanding of introversion and the great strengths that can come from being an introvert. But I still do get frustrated when I hear the term introvert used and interpreted so differently by so many different people. And like I said, I've come to understand that the root of introversion is naturally spending more time in my inner world of ideas and needing and wanting to think about things, or often results in needing to think before speaking. These things are very natural and cannot be changed. But I can have a correct understanding of how I work and how I work best. And by understanding these things about myself, I can change how I view myself and make the most of my strengths. It's also important to remember that no two introverts are alike. There seems to be a tendency to lump all introverts together into the quiet and shy group, and that's not the case. So when will the stigma end? I remember attending a retirement celebration for a psychologist friend of mine. She spoke about how she used to be an introvert, but she could not remain an introvert for long in the organization she worked for. Soon after, I was listening to a radio psychologist who said that he was an introvert, but people that he shared this with acted surprised, saying something like, "You don't act like an introvert," since he's on the radio, does public speaking, and is generally friendly and outgoing. In both cases, the word introvert is being used synonymously with shy rather than the true meaning. Again, these myths we need to keep working on. And I'm troubled that introversion is still so misunderstood, even perhaps by some psychologists. However, I was particularly encouraged this past week as I celebrated National Introverts Week. Hopefully, you celebrated too. If not, make some plans to celebrate next year. I attended several sessions of an online summit and also attended a separate event with a panel of introverts. Both events were very encouraging about some progress that we've made in overcoming the stigma and definitely busting some myths. So National Introverts Week was started by Matthew Pollard, author of the Introvert's Edge to Sales, and this year the Introvert's Edge to Networking. He founded National Introverts Week to encourage introverts to embrace who they are and to find success in their own introverted way. Matthew does some great work in the introverts and success space. And for much more information on Matthew, you can go to matthewpollard.com. So this year, Matthew teamed up with Fifi Mason to host the Quietly Influential Summit, geared for introverted business owners. Fifi Mason is a visibility coach and personal brand strategist, helping introverts in business. You can see fifimason.com for more information on her. So there was a few sessions each day for the whole entire week on introversion and mindset, brand and visibility, connection, and productivity. I had been a speaker last summer at this same event, and I knew it was going to be a good one, and I was not disappointed. It was so great to hear from so many talk about success from an introvert's point of view. The speakers had enjoyed their own success in various industries by using strategies that work for them as an introvert. I took some great notes, and it was so refreshing to hear the positive energy and the celebration of introversion. There was a lot of myth busting, which was wonderful to hear, but it was also encouraging to think with the momentum around this, maybe we can stop myth busting sometime. And introverts and extroverts alike can embrace the gifts of introversion and understand the needs of an introvert and not have to explain, but just embrace. Because every person, whether introverted or extroverted, has unique gifts and strengths that need to be understood, nurtured, supported, and celebrated. So that was a great way to celebrate National Introverts Week. I also attended a virtual networking event that was associated with this summit. We sat down at our virtual tables, and we'd already put some information in about ourselves. So there was like a card in front of us that, told our name and what we did, that kind of thing. And it was really nice to be in a group of introverts talking about what it was like to be an introvert, doing a little reflection on the summit that we were attending. And just talking about the good and the challenges and also misconceptions sometimes about being an introvert. This was also very motivating to keep this great work moving forward, to help introverts understand themselves. And one of the best ways to learn is by talking about our experience with others in the context of personality. Whether they're introverts or extroverts, you can learn a lot by talking about how you relate to the world and the things you need and what in your strengths. It's funny, there was pauses in the conversation here and there, and I made a comment. It was nice to be in a group of introverts where a little silence was understood. And as far as I knew, there weren't rules for this particular gathering, but it did seem like some did want to move on quickly in a speed networking kind of way, as it seemed that's what they were supposed to do. Again, a lot of times the world tells us there's a right extroverted way of doing things. In my case, I said I was enjoying the conversation and wanted to continue to have a deeper conversation. And I stayed at my virtual table as most did. And this is like an example of sometimes we need to challenge how things may have been done and find a way that works better for our personalities. However, sometimes it may be appropriate for the introvert to do that speed networking, and they can get really good at it. But what it goes back to, what are your goals for the event and what are your personal goals? And you should be able to decide what you want and what you need and not just do what's expected. I also attended another event during National Introverts Week. This one was hosted by Alex Reed. You can see more about Alex at ownyourquiet.com. The event was Rise of the Empowered Introvert. It was a live panel with Q&A, and it was a panel of introvert experts. These experts talked about their journey of discovering their own introversion, their strategies for success, and they took questions. There was a lot of great back and forth going on in the chat, and again, a lot of celebration and understanding of what it means to be an introvert and how to find success. And it was announced that this same event would be put back on in May, so stay tuned. So during these two events, the Quietly Influential Summit and the Rise of the Empowered Introvert, it was very encouraging to hear from other introverts and where they found success. But there's still more to do. Look for ways you can attend events like this or get involved in conversations in some way. And again, as always, I would love to hear your feedback and questions for the podcast. Whether it be National Introverts Week, which is in March, or you could also celebrate World Introvert Day on January 2nd, or just any day. There's a lot of great things a greatness that comes from introversion, and it should be celebrated. As a review, here's my take on introversion. I'm naturally drawn to the inner world of ideas, and I have a great imagination. I spend more time in thought than I do focusing on the world around me. I think before I speak. I do better when I prepare in advance for meetings, presentations, and speeches. Sometimes I need some time alone to think and recharge. I've learned what triggers my need for some solitude. Often I need to process answers to questions, especially complex ones. I prefer deep conversations to small talk. I also prefer having a few deep relationships versus many casual acquaintances. Coming to understand these ideas has made all the difference in the world for me. I used to have difficulty in some social situations because I didn't understand myself and somehow felt that I was less than. But understanding who I am and how I naturally focus frees me to be who I want to be. But my point is, no matter how comfortable I am in social situations, and regardless of whether I'm quiet in some settings, the things that make me an introvert will not change. What is at the core of my introversion is who I am. Understanding these things about my personality allows me to make changes in how I do things, how I approach situations. By learning who I am, I can learn the very best way to accomplish my goals. There are many great gifts that come from introversion. What are your gifts? Let people know and find ways to celebrate. Support the introverted authors and bloggers and introverted events out there. Find ways to be part of the conversation. We will end any stigma. Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to further connecting with you. Reach out at quietandstrong.com. Email me at david@quietandstrong.com. I will add social media channels to the show notes. And again, please comment on social media that it's related to this podcast. Send me topics or questions, and we can address those on the show. There's so many great things about being an introvert, so we need those to be understood. Let's keep the conversation going. Get to know your introverted strengths and needs, and be strong.